live now. And yeah, basically my goal here is to have an open discussion and then just kind of collect and go through ideas. And then over the next few weeks, put together some resources, like some structured resources to help people go out, find partners.
Awesome. Awesome.
Oh, looks like we're kind of live now. All right, so excuse me, everybody. So it looks like we're live on YouTube, and I'm here with two Mimic Method students. And this is my first time using Zoom to do a live stream. So excuse the different technical difficulties, but I'm gonna open up the chat. So I'm here with people, and then if you would like to ask a question and join the discussion, please do so in the chat. All right, great. So the theme today, what we'll be discussing, we're talking about how to find a language partner, someone to have a conversation with in your target language. Now, in my last live stream, I talked about the 3 P's of learning, whether you're learning a language or any other complex skill. And that is perception, practice, performance. Perception is when you watch the people who you're trying to mimic, emulate, and they'll make a sound, they'll make a movement with their mouth, whatever it is, within a specific context, and there's a specific meaning connected through all of that. So if someone grabs a glass of water and they say, oh, water, they're moving their mouth to create the sound water, and it signifies this object in the real world. And I perceive that. And then I try to mimic and practice making the same sounds. Then once I've practiced this enough where I've made that connection between the sound and the movement and the situation, then when I go off and I find myself authentically in that situation, in conversation with somebody else, I will perform and say, water, agua, dulo, right? Whatever language it may be. And they say, oh, you want some water? Yes. And then I've succeeded in that small environment. So it's perceive, practice, perform. Now, the most important of all of these is performance, because you don't truly learn something until you've used it and personalized it in your own life. One metaphor you can think of is eating. So perception is like finding the food and putting it into your mouth. And then practice is chewing it up and making it, putting it into your body. But in order for you to actually integrate that food matter into your body, you need to move, right? You need to go out and exercise, perform, build the muscle mass. So otherwise it just passes through you, right? And so performance is the most important thing, because you can study all day, practice all day, but until you've made it yours, you're just going to forget it eventually. Now, in the language learning context, that means you need to find people to have conversations with. And this can be the trickiest part of the whole puzzle, depending on what your situation is. First off, the whole point of learning a language is so you can go and connect to a certain group of people who exist on the opposite side of a language barrier, right? So if you don't already have the language, then how do you connect with those people? It's sort of a catch-22, chicken and an egg type problem. So you want to go and connect with these people, talk to them, but you don't know how to speak yet. So you can't have a conversation. In order for you to learn language, you need to have conversations, but how you do that, right? So obviously you need to have people to connect with, and then you have to go and find those people. Then once you've found them, you have to figure out what to talk about. And it's always different complications. Now, to be honest, I have my own kind of unique ways for going about doing this. And I don't think they'd be super useful for most people because I have a very, unique life, so to speak. So I'm doing this open discussion and inviting different language learners and whatnot to hear what you guys have done and what you're trying to do and what you're struggling with. I've also sent out a survey and I got lots of really great feedback and recommendations there. And I just want to go through basically 3 topics in this call. First, where do you go and find conversation partners? Where have you had success? Where have you had struggle? Then once we kind of see the landscape of where, once you've gotten into the situation where you find someone, how do you go about finding a person, having that person come on a regular basis or having multiple people you can engage with. And then finally, once you've, landed that conversation opportunity, what are you doing? How are you, what are you talking about? What topics do you have based on your level of ability? How are you using that opportunity or performance to actually improve your language ability? So that's how we're going to break up this conversation. Right now we have Kadira and Muntasir as our Mimic Method students to share their experience. So it's not just me talking the whole time. And we're also on YouTube Live. I see Mitchell here. I see Raul. And hopefully other people will come. And if you guys have questions, I'm watching this chat. So I'm going to open up a discussion to everybody. But I'll be, having a verbal conversation with Muntasir and Kadira here. So to start off, I see people already mentioning their favorite places, iTalki and HelloTalk, which by far were the ones with the most responses on my survey. So I'll start with you guys, Kadir or Muntasir. Have you guys ever used, or sorry, not Muntasir, Manish. So Muntasir was someone else earlier. Oh, and I see other people have joined here. So those of you who are in the Zoom webinar and want to be video panelists, please raise your hand on the hand raising function, and then I can promote you to a video panelist and you have a bigger grade. So I got one more person here. Yeah, so if you find a hand raising function, Jeff or Mile Explorer, Stefan or Warren, I can bring you up here and then we can have a conversation. Otherwise, ask questions in the YouTube chat because that's what I'm going to be watching. All right, so right now we have Kadir, Manish, and DMITC. You guys, has any of you used any website like iTalki or HelloTalk or anything else to find a conversation partner?
Yeah.
I use Baseline and WhatsApp.
Okay, so can you talk to us about your experience? While you're talking, I'm going to share my screen as well and kind of show these different things. All right, so BaseLink. Tell us about BaseLink. BaseLink is actually founded by a friend of mine, Connor, and unlimited Spanish tutoring. So it's a paid thing, right? So tell us about how it works and what your experience with it is.
Okay, it really is unlimited classes, and they would test you out to see what level you are. But as far as speaking, you could choose if you're going to take the whole class to speak on something, practice conversation, or you want to practice conversation about a particular subject, right? Like irregular verbs right now is my bane, my bane, my bane, I hate those things. And and seriously, so what I would tell you what to do is tell them what you are doing in your life right now. The more intimate the conversation is, the more you mentally expand your Spanish in your head and make that room in your head flow between English to Spanish, back from Spanish back to English. That flow would become easier the more intimate you speak. So I end up when I'm having like financial problems, I would tell my teacher. If I'm having, when I sold my house, I told my teacher. When I'm trying to move to Costa Rica, I telling my teacher the struggle or stuff like that. The more intimate it becomes, it's easier for you to remember, because you start talking about vague things like octopus. If you're really not into octopus, you may not remember anything about those verbs that you use with octopus or nothing like that.
Mm.
So, and also especially when you're having troubles, drilling with someone about a particular topic, you could stop because they speak English. Also, you can say, "Wait a minute, I don't understand. Why is this I say not I say? Why is this I say not I say? I don't understand. This is driving me crazy. You just told me." I'm sitting there saying, "Has this girl did this for me? Isn't this? I'm speaking right now. Isn't this present tense?" And she said, "Well, you were speaking in present tense, and then you switched to past tense." And you can have that argument because what you supposed to be thinking. They will help you with that process. For example.
Great. And then are you using different teachers each time, or are you like to stick with the same person, or how's that work?
I have my favorite teachers, but then they may become someone else's favorite teacher. So it's a fight. So
Gotcha.
I'm like, the moment you're done, you schedule. And when you have an opportunity to do 2 hours back to back or a full hour, and I really say do 1 hour. If you want to do 30 minutes for speaking, and sometimes you only have 30 minutes for a particular subject, but if you could do an hour, then you could sit there and break something down, writing or whatever, something that drill of where you are in your Spanish that you just have to do, right? And then we could talk about it and practice something, okay? And it's okay to say every time who you are, where you going, what you did today, because that helps in the real world. Disculpe, mi nombre es Kadira. Puedes platicarme español contigo. Es necesario para mí de vivir en Costa Rica en la próxima año, por favor. And because you're saying that every cotton picking time, because this is something you want to do, it becomes ingrained.
Gotcha. That's cool. All right, great. So summarize then on Baselang. You have unlimited access, so you can go in there and just schedule something right away. There's a variety of teachers, but you'll start to choose the teachers who work best for you. However, you want to be diligent and kind of lock in their time, because if they're good, then other people are probably competing with them. And and you can basically run the conversation the best you can to whatever topic or discussion you want to do, and get really into the nitty-gritty details if you want to. That's good. So I guess the only drawback really of it is that it is a paid thing. So it's unlimited, but it's 100.
I disagree. Okay. It's only like $129. That feels like a lot at first. So plan it a month in advance, because we waste $5 a day at Starbucks.
Sure, there you go. So it's definitely worth it. I agree, it's worth the price. So $129 a month it is, and then you get if you really use it, you can definitely get huge money worth out of it. So for those people though who don't have that in their budget for whatever reason, is there anyone else on this panel who has experience using a either cheaper or free service for finding conversation partners? And then I want to hear what your kind of experiences. Stop my share here. Anyone? Manish, you do? Okay, Manish, I'm gonna talk to you now. Thank you, Kadir. That was good. It's good. Connor's gonna appreciate the testimonial there, so I'll let him know.
So I've used Conversation Exchange and My Language Exchange. Those are two websites. My Language Exchange is you have to pay to be able to access more features. But Conversation Exchange is completely free. So if you're looking for people, I've used it for people who are speaking Arabic, and I've been able to contact them, and they've been able to contact me, and I've been able to connect with them on WhatsApp, and after finding them on Conversation Exchange, and we've been able to do some conversation exchanges where I help teach them English, they help teach me Arabic, those sorts of things.
Cool. And so Conversation Exchange, if I understand it properly, is an in-person meetup. So you're practicing second language by meeting with people in your area, right?
It's not in person, actually.
Okay.
It's something where you can meet people online, people who are in different time zones, that sort of thing. I've also used a service called Lexity, which is for in-person meetups where you can do language exchanges. So that one, since I live in the New York area, that one you can, find somebody who's interested in learning the language you're fluent in and who can teach you the language you're interested in learning. You can schedule like a 1 hour Lex where you spend 30 minutes on one language, 30 minutes on the other language, and then report back to tell the website how it went. So that's for in-person, but Conversation Exchange, you can contact people anywhere in the world.
That's cool. And then how about Language Exchange? What's the deal here? MyLanguageExchange.com.
Yeah, My Language Exchange is similar to Conversation Exchange. I think for more features, you have to pay like $24 a year. And basically what happens is you tell what language you're interested in learning, and you can find people who are fluent in that language. And I've used that website also to contact people. I contacted a guy in India who, not in India, sorry, a guy in Britain who was speaking. I was able to speak Hindi with, I've been able to contact other people for other languages as well, and they have like a huge database. I think they said they have like 3 million people in their database. So
Mm.
it's another great way to contact people for language exchanges.
Okay, that's great. All right, cool. So let me ask you this then. Between the so you talk about two different ways of doing exchange. One is doing it online, so you find these communities or databases where you find people who are in this, who you're able to organize like a Skype call with, and then some are in person, where you find someone within your area, and then you guys can go meet up. Can you talk a bit more about your experience with, I think Lexity is the in-person one, or any other in-person things you've had, and what you find as advantages of the in-person versus online, and what you find as disadvantages in setting that up?
One of the advantages of doing it in person is that uh, you can actually see notes that the person is writing for you. So what I've seen is I was on a language exchange with someone who was teaching me Japanese, for example, and he was able to write down certain like letters and words and then show them to me. I was able to read the paper that he was writing on. Obviously, when you're doing it online, it's a little difficult to do that. There are some programs that allow you to have a kind of like a sketchboard where you can write things out on, but others don't. So it's a little more difficult that way. If it's online, it's actually, if it's like through Skype or WhatsApp, then it's a little more flexible. I mean, I can be lying in bed, for example, and speaking with someone, all the way across the world. Um, so I've used both.
Hmm.
Um, I've used in-person exchanges and online exchanges. I think online exchanges are better for uh, talking, if you just want to talk and speak. Whereas if you want to learn something about the language, like where someone's like demonstrating a concept and writing it on a paper, then in-person exchanges are better.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, that's good. That's a really good way of explaining it as well. So you can just get that peer conversation practice if you can online, and you can do it while you're still like laying in bed when they're hanging out. In terms of meeting up in person, there's a bit more of an investment there of your time and whatnot. For example, if you're doing online and you find the person you're speaking with, you don't really vibe with, you can just be like, all right, and leave. Have you ever had an experience where you go out of the way, take the metro, and like go and meet someone you've found on Lexity or some other platform, and then gotten there and be like, oh, this person like sucks, or you're just kind of like, well, now I'm here for an hour. Have you ever had a kind of bad experience going out there and meeting someone in person?
I haven't, because I have texted the people beforehand just to find out, whether they're how much interested they are, that sort of thing.
Mm,
Basically, with Lexity, what they advise you to do is you spend half the time speaking one language, half the time speaking another language. So it's structured in some way. And I haven't come across anybody who, where the experience was really bad. And I think it's just because, when you're meeting somebody and, the other person knows that you're coming and that he or she is also going to be there spending some time, then they have to be pretty serious minded about learning the language that you can teach, and you have to be pretty serious about learning the language that they can teach.
mm,
So there was one time where, I met a guy from Africa, and he was nice. There wasn't anything wrong with him. It's just that he was interested in having pizza during the time that we were talking. And so there was like a 5-minute break, but it's not like he sucked or anything. He was really nice. He taught me some great Arabic words, those sorts of things. But like in a call, you can say, okay, I've got to go for 5 minutes. I'll call you back. Whereas if it's if it's an in-person meeting, then then it kind of gets, well, I spent time to come here. You don't really want to wait for a person who wants to go grab something to eat and do something else.
gotcha. Yeah, it makes sense. Cool. So yeah, it sounds like there's more kind of considerations when you're doing stuff in person, and people have invest their time, and there might be a misunderstanding on how to best use that time. But it seems like you're pretty experienced in all these things, and that's something I want to emphasize moving on to the next section of this call, which is that okay, let's take a step back actually, and let's kind of branch this out into the different categories. So Kadira started us off talking about base slang, and what Connor was trying to solve with that project is just reduce the friction as much as possible between you and having your conversation. It's only in Spanish for now, but you and having a conversation with a teacher, right? So anytime you go on there and you can talk about anything you want to talk about, just got to schedule a time, and you can have a call within an hour, 30 minutes or whatever, right? So that's that situation. And then so you have to pay for that kind of premium. So when you're not willing to pay for it, then you have to pay for it with your time and a little bit of investment of troubleshooting and figuring out stuff. So it sounds like Manish really put in the work there to try out all these different platforms. We're going to have a list of all these things that you mentioned, other people mentioned, and he goes on there, finds a partner, either meets them in person, finds them online. And the thing is, when you first do these things, there's a huge friction, a huge resistance, and you're kind of like, is this person gonna suck? Do I really want to go out? Or like, how do I use this app? Like, what do I make a profile? And what are these coin things? And I find people very often get stuck there, where they're like, all right, there's just too much work going on. I don't want to be a part of this. But what I highly encourage you is that, once again, performance and conversation practice is the most important part of the whole puzzle. So if you're not going to pay for it in these kind of more structured things, you need to really set aside the time to figure out the technology you're going to use, the platform you're going to use. And then when you find those people, really figure out the dynamics of like, okay, sometimes people want to get pizza. I'm not about pizza right now. I'm on keto diet. So like, let people know like, hey, we're here to learn, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, the first time you do it is just like learning a language. You make your mistakes, you mess things up. But if you just keep doing it, eventually you get into a flow. You know right away how to find, based on what this partner is saying in the chat box, you're kind of like, this person's not really what I'm going to look for. And then you just kind of know how things go. So the most important thing is whatever pathway you choose, whatever thing you go to, that you just really dedicate, a week or two to just getting to know it and really trying it out all the way to the bottom until you know for sure that it's working for you, and not to give up at the beginning phase. So I want to applaud Manish, because it sounds like you really did your work and you've put in the effort to meet different people on different platforms, and it's paying off. So thank you guys for that. Before we move on to the next section, I just want to go back to this YouTube and look at these questions we have here from the YouTube viewers. All right, someone's had some questions we'll get to in this, maybe in a later section. Eduardo's asking, how do you persuade your language partner to give consent to record conversations? Quick answer to that is, I wouldn't think about it in terms of persuasion. I would just think about it in terms of like, authentically, genuinely, and honestly asking like, hey, this would be super useful to me if I had this recorded. Would you mind? Yes or no? And if they say no, then so be it. And if they say yes, then great. So for example, before I wanted to have a conversation with Manish and Kadira and whatnot. And before I brought them up on Zoom, I said, hey, I want to have people to have a conversation with. It's going to be recorded and put on YouTube, and people are going to see this for a long time. So if you're cool with that, please let me know. Let's do it. And they said yes. Some people said no, rather not. And then, you just find the people who are cool with it. If we use Manish's program, for example, the Lexity, that's something you can filter out ahead of time, probably. And all right, cool. So let's go through. Someone else says they like conversation exchange. Someone says I use base slang, but they prefer iTalki. I just want to quickly touch on iTalki and HelloTalk, just because it was the ones that were the most referenced in the surveys I did. HelloTalk. And then if anyone in the comments can talk about why or you like or dislike iTalki, or why you dislike or like HelloTalk. I just want to kind of touch on those and then move on to the next section. So here's HelloTalk. I don't have much experience with either of these. I've dabbled around with it, but learn a language by chatting with the native speakers around the world for free. more of a phone-based thing. So you're texting people and I suppose setting up calls. Whereas iTalki here, you know, you see they're more laptop-based, and you're finding. I mean, of course, you can Skype on your phone as well, but it's all about finding that teacher. There's also partners you can do for free, but of course, teachers are more reliable. You just have to pay the money for it. So let's go through some comments here. Does anyone have anything to say, positive or negative, about HelloTalk or iTalki? Mitchell says iTalki rates are fair and you can see reviews. Yeah, that's really good actually. So for the teachers, you want to see if they're a good teacher. It's like, you know, an Airbnb or something. You can just look at the different stars. All right, Mo Adams says it's difficult to find consistent language partners on HelloTalk. So consistency is a very important concept. And once again, when you're not paying for it, it's very difficult to find consistency. One thing I wanted to touch on as well when Manish was talking is the Lexity format. They recommend people are meeting up because they're doing an exchange, right? So you're there to teach them English or whatever other language you know, and they're there to teach you yours. So you divide your time up accordingly, and you know that means you'll get half as much time to practice your language versus if you pay a tutor for it. So be aware of that. And then of course, if the person's not getting paid, then they're less likely to be able to show up on a regular basis. So if you're doing a conversation thing and you're looking for consistency, then look for someone who's really serious and really committed to learning English or whatever language you're offering to them, because that'll increase the likelihood that they're going to show up on a regular basis. Cool. And then Nikki was saying, when I'm recording, I video myself. Everyone's been okay with recording themselves as opposed to recording the other person. It's a good thing. Oh, and someone else said, I'm a huge fan of the app Tandem. I've had great long-term success there. That's another, I'd say the third most common thing I heard people mention in the survey. So yeah, once again, we'll have a list of all these things, put it in the YouTube link so you can go through and try out any of these. This one got an award on Google Play. And I plan to go through a couple of these as well and do my own kind of little review and experience and get to know them. So cool. I think we've gotten lots of ideas and suggestions here then for places to find, where to find language partners. One more thing I just want to add on there as well is meetup.com. If you live in an area, you know, or it's probably better to Google it actually to say like language exchange New York. And it was usually a meetup thing will come up. And usually there'll be some kind of group or outfit that's hosting a weekly or bi-weekly, monthly event where a bunch of people come and speak different languages and whatnot. I highly recommend those if you can find one of those nearby to you. In general, I recommend speaking in person. I mentioned to you before when it comes to language, obviously we're focusing on the sound, but language is not just about sound, it's also about the facial expressions, the body language, the physicality of it. And when you're in a real life situation with another human being and you have the environment around you, it's a more engaging experience. So you actually do perform and learn more when you're physically with someone versus when you're just online with them. So any opportunity you can find to go to a physical space with a person, then you want to take advantage of that. All right, cool. So thank you guys on the video panel, and thank you guys in the YouTube chat for all your insights. Now I want to talk about getting more into, let's just say you've gone to these different places and you found your tutor or your language exchange partner. Now I want to talk about how do you actually best use that time depending on what level you have. So I'm going to go back to our Zoom panelists. DMITC, would you like to share, I'll figure out what your name is soon enough, but would you like to share with us your experience with conversation practice and how you use it or what you struggle with when you're trying to get the most out of it?
All right, good afternoon, everyone.
What was your name?
My situation is somewhat different because I'm actually a full-time student.
Okay.
at university here. I'm doing French in Montreal.
Oh, cool.
It's, I guess there's no other place to learn French but being in the environment itself. But I found that my challenges, even though when I'm in classes, I'm a first year student at the moment, I understand basically what the lecturers are saying, what the professors are saying. But my challenge is me responding to what they are saying, as well as when I leave the confines of the university environment and I'm in the community, because at the moment I'm living in a very English-speaking district of Montreal. I find that if I don't make an effort to speak the language, it becomes a case where I'm simply doing another subject at school, that kind of thing. So what I force myself to do is, whenever I go to the shops and to the groceries and so on, I tell them, I just make conversation. I'm a student here in Montreal. Je suis étudiant ici à Montréal, and speak to me in French. Even though I speak, my French is not all that good at the moment, I use that as an opportunity to force myself to speak the language, because immersion is by far the best thing you can have. It's okay to be in class, it's okay to do your assignments, it's all well and good to get the good grades, but the important thing is to have that confidence to be able to speak, even at a very elementary level.
Mm.
So that has been my experience.
That's great. So I want to touch on a couple of points you made there. First, using once again that model of perception, practice, and performance. When you're in the classroom and you have lecturers, use the word lecturers, so they're lecturing at you, for example. What you're getting there is perception, right? They're explaining to you when and how to use these different words in context, and you're inputting the information. They may also have like a practice thing as well, where you're kind of taking a test or trying things out. But like you said, if you don't actually go out and use it in a real life context, then it's just another academic subject. And if you've graduated high school and took chemistry, does anyone remember anything from chemistry class? No, right? So like you just lose it. So it needs to be actually used. Now another thing I want to touch on, which is cool, is two things. One, like you said, you're in an immersion environment. You're living in a French-speaking city, and you have opportunities all around you to speak. So you want to look at those ones that frequently pop up, such as buying stuff at a store. So you could just walk into the store and then just say, people know English in Montreal. You could use English and then get your stuff and then kind of grunt and walk on out. But you say, no, I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity, and I'm going to strike up a small talk conversation, and then clock in those hours of performance. So all the things I learned in class, I can now integrate it here. So the final thing I want to talk about was you started saying, I'm a student here in Montreal, I'm blah, blah, blah. And you had, what we can call your spiel, or what I call your script. And essentially, I talk a lot about scripting in our program, where you come to a conversation, especially if you're new and you don't know what you're saying, or you have limited vocabulary, limited form of expressing yourself. Your nervousness is turned up all the way full max. How do you deal with that situation? Well, before you enter into the performance, you practice a script the same way before an actor goes on stage, he or she would have memorized their lines, or before a comedian goes on stage, they would have memorized their routines, right? So the question is, what is your routine? Well, the simplest thing is, what are you doing there, right? If you're from out of town, that's gonna be the first thing that becomes relevant in a conversation. So you had, I'm a student here, and this is why I'm a student here. Maybe these are things I like about it. So what I recommend to people is to take that script, and maybe your script right now is not as robust as you like, but you've practiced it enough. So go to your teachers and take advantage of that opportunity, and then say like, hey, I want to actually talk a bit more about, where I come from and what my observations of Montreal are. And you write it out in English or whatever your first language is. And then you say like, these are the things that I would communicate if I were speaking to another person who's my native speaker. Like I want to kind of comment on these things, but I'm not quite confident in how to do that in French yet. So you figure that out in the practice and perception environment. And then you sit home and you drill it. And now you walk into the supermarché, what was it? I used to live in Montreal. What was that one? The dog on the front. Fido, or not, I forget what it was, but anyways.
Okay.
What's the name of the dep? You walk into the dépanneur, right? You walk into the dep.
Right?
Yeah, dépanneur. All right, you walk into the dep, and then you just kind of strut in there like, ha, I got my new script. And you're like, oh, right. And then that's how you can take that same interaction that you're going to have on a daily basis anyways. And instead of stalling out at the same conversation, once you've mastered the level you're at, just keep leveling up until eventually, you can talk about, politics and physics and philosophy with the dépanneur guy, and taking it up each time. Does that make sense?
Actually, I have found the line that I use is like an icebreaker. So it helps to make that link between the whoever I'm speaking to and myself.
Yeah.
So instead of just asking for, well, I want this, you just make conversation. So I just went, je suis étudiant ici à Montréal, la 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 la, and that actually develops conversation, which I may not always understand, but at least it forces me, to start speaking and thinking in French. So and as a matter of fact, it works all the time for me.
That's great.
Also, listening to the radio and television, of course. So I constantly have the television on, the French stations. So because I want to get my ears accustomed, maybe by osmosis, hearing.
That's your perception. That's your perception environment. Yeah. Quick question. So you say you have an icebreaker. What is your icebreaker, and how did you figure out that it was a good one?
All right. Okay. So basically, I would say, but by law here in Montreal, when you enter a store, they would say bonjour, hi.
Yeah.
And I would respond, I would say bonjour. So by that, by saying that, they would continue speaking to me in French. And when they, carry on, in a very French way, I would like, okay, je suis désolé, je suis étudiant ici à Montréal, à l'Université Concordia, je suis ici à apprendre français. So in that way, they now tone back on the level of the French. And it helps me now at the same time to meet them halfway. So their French is not very, it is not at a very high level, but at the same time, it forces me now to speak the French. So as I said, that is my way of, introducing myself. Also, I'm from the Caribbean, where it's like 34 degrees right now, Celsius, but right now in Montreal, it's minus 34 degrees, wind chill. So it's like, why are you here? So it's from there now, it starts a conversation. So it works, as I said, practically all of the time, and I enjoy doing that. It's just that I want to take it now at a higher level, and say additional things.
Cool. So based on what I said before, then how would you take it to another level? Like, what's another level of conversation you can go to expand it further?
Okay. Now there was something that was mentioned on your session last week that I found was very interesting. Joining Toastmasters. That is what I think at least for me, my next level is, because if I'm in a Toastmasters club, which is French speaking, then definitely I'm forced to speak French. So that is in fact my next step. And of course, quite a number of Toastmaster clubs here in Montreal. So I'm just looking around. So for me, that is going to be the next level. As I said in class, I can understand basically not everything that is said, but for me, it is not an academic subject.
Yeah,
it's a thinking, it's a way of life, it's a culture, it's understanding the people here, the different nuances. And of course, the French here in Quebec is much different from standard French.
Yeah.
So those are the things I want to take full advantage of.
That's great. All right, cool. I want to touch on a few points on what you said before about the icebreakers. So one of the common questions I get about having conversations with people is this situation. You enter, they say bonjour, hi, and you're like, bonjour. And then the person's like, oh, French. And they start speaking like super fast French. And then you get into the situation, and this is a funny kind of human psychology thing where you're like, oh no, now they think I speak French. And especially if you take my courses and then your pronunciation is improving. And then and they're like, oh, now I'm gonna find out it's all a big lie. And then people get super nervous. And you just kind of smile and like, okay, and they're like, so that situation it's silly. We laugh at it when we're outside, but when we're in it, it's like a real life thing. We're like, oh crap, I don't want to give myself away here, because there's this feeling of like, you're just gonna let this person down if like actually I don't speak French. Like, why did you lie to me? You know, like that's like what you feel. So anyways, so you've obviously anticipated that, maybe you've experienced it, and then this gets back to the script. So the way scripts work, let's go back to the analogy of a comedian, right? The comedian kind of has an idea that, oh, this joke's gonna kill it, and then they go on stage, they tell the first part of the joke, people laugh, and the second part, people are like crickets, you know? And then they say, that's their feedback. And they say, okay, it turns out my theory was a bit off. Maybe if I adapt it and try it this way. And then they come and it works that time. So bit by bit, you start to build out this thing. So in your own personal script, you found out, okay, in order to like take the steam out of people speaking to me too fast and you guys slow it down a little bit, let me memorize the line that indicates to them that I'm actually not a fluent French speaker and that I might need a little bit more assistance. You say, oh, excuse me, sorry, but I'm actually a student here. I'm here to learn your language, and so far I'm at this level. And they're like, oh, that's really nice. So once again, you have that memorized, so you don't have to be afraid in that situation. And then the other thing you mentioned as well is, you have a topic that when you mention it, you know it's going to get a response out of people. So you say, well, I'm actually from the Caribbean, and right now it's 34 degrees there and it's negative 34 degrees here. And they're like, oh, what did you leave there? You know what they're going to say. And then another element of that, so you know what they're going to say, which you have a nice comeback to what they're going to say. And then this is actually what I want people to have. This is why I created my program. There's a difference between just, moving your mouth and just throwing sounds at people's faces versus having a real conversation. And real conversations are ones that are flowing. Everyone's enjoying it. They're going back and forth. Like, even in English, your first language, when you meet someone at a party and, maybe some people, it's kind of like, kind of boring, but then you have a conversation with someone and you guys just go into it. And then you just really free flowing. And then like 10 years later, you're married with kids or whatever. Like that's what I want people to have, those types of conversations. And that's more of, and the way you find out how to have that is you keep having them and paying attention to what things you say get a response out of people. So great. So it looks like you're doing the right things here. And then now you're taking up to the next level now, which is Toastmasters. You're talking about confidence now. When you can go, you've memorized like a speech, you go on, give the speech, people give you feedback, you give a better speech next time. What you're growing is your confidence. I want to talk a little bit more about confidence and then bring someone else on to talk. The thing about confidence is, I mentioned how you perceive all these things on the radio or your class or your different applications, my program, then you practice them and you have all these connections in your mind and they're sitting there, right? But now you enter into a conversation, the context of performance. And all of a sudden, when you're nervous, you forget like 90% of them, right? And then you're like, man, I know this word, but is this not coming to me right now? Because what happens is the lack of confidence in the moment kind of cuts you off from your information because now you're self-conscious. So within your conscious mind, 99% of it is occupied with like, oh my God, is everyone looking at me and do they hate me, right? So when you have confidence and you're in flow, you're not self-conscious anymore. You're focusing on the other person. You're focusing on the moment. You're engaged. And then all of a sudden, your unconscious mind comes forward and all the things you learned in class and all the things you've learned in the world are now available to you to bring forth and use. So confidence isn't just about, getting over the hurdle of speaking and that kind of stuff. It's actually directly related to what you're able to access within yourself in terms of the knowledge you've picked up in your perception and practice. So confidence is really important. So I'm just going to just tie this idea of scripting. Very few people actually do this because it takes a little bit of preparation work. And they kind of go and they continually go into a conversation, not quite knowing what to say, even though it's the same conversation every time. And then they walk away feeling bad about themselves because like, that was so bad. That was so bad. When you do that, you keep training yourself to hate conversations. Whereas if you've taken time and you practice that nice 5-minute flowing, transaction at the market or at the depot and that kind of stuff, then each time you do that, you build your confidence and you just dramatically increase your learning speed because now you actually bring positive emotion to the entire experience. So it seems like you've already kind of figured that out for yourself, and now you're you're riding that wave upward.
If I should also
Yeah,
add this as
sure.
well too, quickly, everyone has skills that they can transfer to language learning. So, for instance, I'm a business consultant. I have been when I was back home, and doing presentations and speaking in front of groups, is something I did all the time. So that has not been a problem. So what I've been trying to do is to take that skill of speaking, of doing presentations and speaking in front of groups, and transfer that in speaking in French. Of course, there's always the one would feel somewhat unsure of oneself because it's a foreign language. But the thing is, one still has that skill. So what I would encourage people to do is to look at themselves and see what skill sets they really have and transfer that into the learning of French. It works because as part of my courses, I have to do presentations. So doing the presentations in class is not a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Because I already have that skill set. It's a matter of being confident now in using the right words. Conjugations give me hell all the time, but at least it's by doing it more, it's forcing me to learn my conjugations.
Yeah.
If you understand what I'm saying. But the fact is, we all have skills. We all have the skill sets that we can use to help us in the language.
That's a great point.
What I have found works as well too for me is, even if it's just one can just get one, if it's a sentence or two that sort of breaks the ice again. There's an expression I learned many years ago when I was learning French, and it goes like this: "Je parle français comme un vache espagnol," which I totally love. So when I say that, when I find myself in a bind, I say that, "Je parle français comme un vache espagnol. Je suis très très désolé." So that in itself helps people to see me not as a good French speaker, but at least it sort of meets me halfway.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And as I said, it helps in the conversation.
Yeah, that's great.
So
cool. Yeah, thanks for that. I'm gonna take that then for the transition. I want to talk about this for the last 10 minutes here. So you mentioned skill sets. You have the skill set of giving presentations, and I would say I also have that skill set. However, there is these dynamics of personality. I'm an extroverted person, and I actually like speaking and putting myself out there in that kind of way. So even though I would get nervous speaking different language, in general, I imagine the nervousness I experience in speaking in front of people is just generally less because I talk too much anyways, right? So there's a lot of other half of the language learning world who would identify more as introverts, and even in their own language, feel a little bit more anxiety or discomfort putting themselves out there and speaking. So I want to go over to the YouTube comments now and see what people have to say about that. And then also, if there's anyone, I have one more conversation here in the panelists, in the Zoom panelists, to see how much people joined us here. Maria, Charlene, Stefan, Karen. If any of you raise your hand if you self-identify as someone who's a bit shyer when it comes to speaking, and how you've maybe adapted that for your conversation. Cool. I'm gonna promote you, Jeff, and then I'm gonna go to YouTube and then see what questions you guys have there. Specifically, if you're someone who dealing with conversation when you're a bit shyer and maybe you don't have, but what are the skill sets you could potentially leverage in order to improve your language ability? All right, cool. I'm just gonna see a few more questions here on YouTube, and then all right, a couple more tips here people have from Brian. Larger urban areas sometimes have groups or clubs of native language speakers where you can practice. So we showed that before on meetup.com. Just Google search language exchange or your target language exchange and then your city, see what comes up. Someone's mentioning about it's very much like a dating site, only you're finding tandems. Cool. All right. Your approach is perfect. Telling people right away that, okay, Kate saying, the video panelist, your approach is perfect. Telling people right away that you are in Quebec to learn French. You want to practice their language. Exactly. I always do that as well. I highly recommend that. There's a term for that, actually. I remember reading about it in a book. It's basically kind of addressing the elephant in the room. So if you walk in and there's like a giant like stain on your face, I don't know, like whatever, some kind of thing that like in a job interview, and then the person's kind of like, he's not going to mention it. So it's just kind of sitting there. Your best thing to do is just to point it out ahead of time. And then that way everyone can be at ease, because we don't have to pretend like we're not noticing this thing, right? Cool. All right, so let's go then to Jeff. So I brought you on because I wanted to end this conversation speaking about, having conversations with people when you don't feel exactly confident, or you're a bit shyer in general when speaking. So I'm gonna try to unmute you, and if you have video, that'd be nice to put it on. Otherwise, we'll try just audio. Is your stuff working? If not, see Charlene can try as well. All right, Jeff, doesn't seem like yours is working, so I'm gonna try with Charlene then. All right, Charlene, if you can you unmute your?
How
you doing? You got? I can hear you now.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
So, well, mine's a little different because I grew up in a Haitian household, Haitian Creole household. And from a very young age, my parents, I remember my mother would say some kind of discouraging things about me speaking Creole. She would say, "Oh, you didn't say that right. You didn't say that right." And then, so I went to school and the other kids are like, "Oh, you speak Creole like a Bahamian," because I live in the Bahamas. And I was always very terrified of speaking Creole. I was, I would sweat bullets and I'd be really, really afraid because I always felt like I was inadequate or I wouldn't say it right. But then because I had, I guess more or less for work, I had to speak to more Haitians, and I realized I just had to improve. So I just took it upon myself to just read as much and just speak as much as I could, even though I was still afraid. And then you like have people make comments like, "Oh, you're supposed to know. Why don't you know how to speak it properly?" So it was like I felt like I was supposed to know what I didn't know. So it wasn't like it was something where I just picked up and said I'm going to learn it one day. It was like I'm supposed to know, and that's like the greatest fear, because it's different when someone doesn't expect you to speak a language well. I learned how to speak Chinese, but nobody expects me to speak Chinese. So it's like, okay, so I go for broke. And so I just learned, I guess what I learned to do is at home, I just start looking at people and mimicking them. I guess learning from your method, just like the little nuances. And like, I guess Haitians tend to be a little more animated, and then they say a lot of colorful stuff. So I just, in my mind, I'm always trying to think, okay, no, what's a colorful way I can put this? So I would say the fear isn't gone, but I think it's just like you have to like just become an actress. And I think that's what I try to do, is be an actress. Even with the Chinese, I mean, obviously you look at me, I'll never be Chinese because I'm Black. But it's like that actress thing, like, you just kind of like look at how they do things, how they walk, how they talk, and then you like, as stupid as it feels, like you just do it. And then you just like, so that's advice. I mean, because I know about the fear, it's like that paralyzing fear that grips you, like, and you just want to run away from the situation because like relatives would call on the phone and you'd be like, I need to get off the phone because I don't know what I want to say. I don't know what I want to say. I'm scared. And so it's just like trying to be like, I guess, a little puppet. And I think that works. But then you have to put yourself in that kind of situation where you have to get over like being shy. And so like now I'm like, I learned Spanish in school, which wasn't really learning Spanish, but I used to be around a lot of Spanish people years ago. So I decided I'm going to try to learn it again. And I guess, again, like, it's that fear of I'm supposed to know and I don't know and I'm scared and all that stuff. But I'm like, but I like the idea of writing out a script that you already know what you're going to say. And there's an app called Hi Native where you can just send like a 1-line recording of yourself, and a native speaker will like give you tips on like how you can improve it. And I like using HelloTalk because, it's like you see the way that native speakers would naturally say things when they're like texting to each other. So it kind of imitates life. And then someone was like, well, fine, reading materials. So I would always look for children's reading material online. Like with Chinese, I look for what children would read. I would read that. Because then I get the sequences of events and how to say it. And then they say talk shadowing, repeat after the person. So I do that. And so I guess, fear is a real thing. And I mean, it's like something you can't put into words, but it's like you have to just do it anyway, even though you're afraid, because if you just never say anything, then you'll never learn. And I guess that's it.
That's great. So 2 things I want to touch on then to kind of wrap this up. first, this issue of expectations and how that affects your fear and your confidence. I'll tell you guys a quick funny story that came to mind while you were saying that. I've always had a rocky relationship with salsa, the dancing form del salsa. And the reason for it is because I spent some time in a place called Cali, Colombia, which is self-professed as the capital of salsa. Literally, they play salsa music everywhere on the buses, the hotel lobbies. It's just non-stop salsa, which you think would be a cool thing, which it is but then after a week, you're like, oh my God, like I can't listen to any more salsa. Anyways, I would go to these salsa clubs and because that's all there were. And the thing is, just by the way I look, there's different levels of salsa. And then the people who are the ultimate best salsa dancers in the world, they just happen to look like me. But I'm from Pennsylvania and like I can do basic salsa moves, but I'm not the Michael Jordan of salsa by any stretch of the imagination. So what happened was then I would come in and then people will want to know, girls will want to dance with me. And they're like, ¿Quieres bailar conmigo, por favor? And they'd have this look in their eye, like they're expecting me to just do this crazy salsa, like extravaganza. And I'm like, I'm actually not Colombian. And this is not my culture I grew up in. So I'm just really basic steps. And then we dance and then their faces would just kind of drop in disappointment. And then I was like, man, screw this dance. This is not fair. And then meanwhile, these Irish guys who would come and then they would be practicing like nonstop for like 3 months. And they're kind of doing all this kind of shimmy and stuff like that. And I was kind of like, whoa, look at that Irish guy. He's doing salsa. This guy is the man. And I was like, man, like, this is not fair. If the only way anyone's even gonna like accept me is if I'm just top level. And then they're kind of like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to be anyways. Right. So I was like, I don't want to dance salsa because it's a lose-lose situation for me. Right. So anyways, it's just kind of funny story of how, based on the expectations people have for you, that expectations is disappointment is expectations minus reality, right? So if you have super high expectations, so we were talking before when you're speaking French, for example, and you walk in and you set really high expectations because you pronounce bonjour really high and stuff like that, with good pronunciation, then people's expectation is high. And then now you're more nervous because you don't want to let them down. But then you kind of let the steam out by having a follow-up sentence say, hey, by the way, I'm actually learning this language right now. So don't expect me to be, fantastic or understand everything you're saying. And now you've lowered the expectation. So in general, learning the skill and scripting of setting expectations goes a long way in determining how that person responds to you and thus how confident you feel in the conversation. So don't ever underestimate that. And then the final thing you touched on, which I want to kind of wrap up with, is this idea of performance. In fact, you even said yourself, it's kind of like you have to be an actor or an actress. And I think that's super important because this is actually the mimic method is not just my philosophy for language learning, it's my philosophy for life. And essentially, I think the way you progress in life is you kind of look at the people who you admire, the people you want to emulate, who you want to mimic, and then you mimic them. And by mimicking them, you look at how they're moving, what they're doing, and every single detail of it. And it's not just like, oh, this guy is really cool and successful. Let me think about it for a bit. It's like, no. What is that person doing? What are the actions they're taking in their life? And then you do this this performance when you're kind of imagining that person inside of you. And I think this is, well, I know just researching, this is a deep human instinct. This is how we're able to connect with each other. If I go to China and I see how people are carrying their bodies and I see how they're speaking, like, and then I start to kind of put that spirit in me and then embody it and then sound like them, then all of a sudden 2 things happen. They respond to me more positively. And then B, I start to develop this kind of alter ego Chinese persona. And it starts off as a character, right? Chinese Idahosa or French Idahosa. It starts off as a character, but when I keep doing it and doing it and doing it, that character becomes integrated into my character and it just becomes another aspect of me. And then that's how you round yourself out as a person. So now by expanding yourself and your personality that way, you are now more deeply entrenched and connected to a different culture. And that's really why I do what I do, because lots of people here have experience either with parents from a different country or you've moved and you're living in a different place. right now. So you know the experience of kind of straddling different cultures. Myself as well. My mom's from Nigeria and I grew up in the US and have traveled a lot. So that experience of being able to kind of hop across borders and get that wider view, I think is one of the most kind of greatest gifts you can have. So people who don't have that and they want to have that, this is what I'm trying to teach. So we're using this, the focus on pronunciation is not just a technical thing. It's actually a very practical thing because, like Charlene said, we're never gonna look like a Chinese person, but if the next best thing is to sound like one, and I lived in China for a bit, and I've had experiences where Chinese people are like, wow, like you sound just like my dad. It's kind of weird, but like it's kind of cool. And then all of a sudden we're able to transcend these other kind of barriers and kind of connect on that human quality. But it really does get to the actor and the actress thing. So I'll say one last thing about that. When I remember the moment when I first started to break through in Spanish was the moment I decided that I was no longer going to speak Spanish like American Idahosa. I was going to try to speak Spanish like Carlos, right? Like, so instead of saying, puedo tener más tacos, I said, puedo tener más tacos, and then I was just it wasn't just the words, it was the facial expression, everything. As soon as I really started to put myself in there, things kind of blew up. And that's what I call the mimic method. You really kind of mimic and become. Cool. So that's a good way of wrapping that up. Thank you guys, our video panelists, for joining us here. And thank you. Right. And thank you all YouTube guys. Any more questions I just want to wrap up with? So I have one more question here. How do you stop feeling weird about being a foreigner? I don't even like being asked about things that make me different than my conversation partner in general. So it gets back to what I was saying. We're one thing I like to say is like, we all have different, hair, different colored skins, different clothing, all that kind of stuff. But one thing we all have in common is like, we all have the same mouth, right? And that's why if there's anything this guy can pronounce, I can pronounce it too. You just got to figure it out, right? And more importantly than that, we're way more alike than we are different as human beings. So when you come into a conversation, there's going to be things that make you different. For example, you are a foreigner, you're from a different place, you have a different culture, a different way of speaking and acting. However, you're also part of the same human race. So, we mentioned earlier, you're saying, I'm from the Caribbean and we're in Montreal right now. It's 35 degrees back home and negative 35 degrees here. What he's essentially doing there is he's finding a point of connection between the two of them. Two different cultures, completely different weathers, but what they have in common is they both like hot weather and they don't like cold weather, right? And that kind of universal human experience of just walking outside and dealing with the forces of nature, that's what he's focusing on. So it might seem like there are so many things that make you different, but it's all based on whatever you bring the focus of the conversation to. So if you practice focusing people and yourself on all the things that you have in common, then that's all that seems to matter within that conversation. So if you're feeling weird about being a foreigner, this is actually gonna be a counterproductive thought cycle you get into, where all of a sudden you're just thinking about all the ways you're being a foreigner. But if you do a bit of scripting and you think to yourself, like, what are ways that I'm not a foreigner, but I'm just another person? And how can I communicate that in conversation? How can I focus on that? How can I look for that in other people? Then that's all of a sudden where your mind's gonna flow. And before you know it, you're gonna forget you're a foreigner. You're gonna forget you're even there. And you're just gonna be vibing with that person. So my response to that is, you are the co-creator of the universe, so to speak. So whatever the world brings forth to you is gonna be partly dependent on what you bring to it. So focusing your own mind and doing within your own realm of control to create the experience you wanna create, that's where you wanna really develop that art form. So cool, I'll end on that. Don't want to get too philosophical on you guys. And thank you again, everybody, for joining. This should be up on YouTube right away so you can watch the replay. And like I said, I plan to go through all these things you guys are recommending and do more detailed kind of reviews and blog posts on it. So you have more practical resources to find conversation partners. All right, cool. So merci beaucoup, muchas gracias, 谢谢 everyone, and I'll chat with you guys live stream hopefully next week.
Prashant.
Take care. Bye.